There are members of the Obama administration who fully acknowledge that this happened. Tommy Vietor, he tweeted out, yeah, probably Hamas was in the building, but still you shouldn't hit the building. Unreal. At a certain point, it is not about being pro-Palestinian. It is about just being anti the Jewish state. And the media continue to be garbage at their jobs. Right before the Jewish holiday of Shavuot, which is why I was off for the past couple of days, Israel knocked out this building in Gaza, which was being used by Hamas. Just clearly being used by Hamas. Okay, and the Associated Press had offices there. Now, the reason that Hamas locates in buildings with the Associated Press there is specifically because they wish to use the Associated Press as a shield. This is why. Because then Israel hits an empty building. Okay, there was no one in there. They hit the empty building, and then the Associated Press starts whining to the world about how terrible it is that Israel would knock down a building. How awful that Israel would do this sort of thing. Except that Israel had apparently showed smoking gun material, classified material, to the U.S. government explaining that Hamas was in the building. Okay, which is not a shock because Hamas and the Associated Press have a covert deal. That deal is that Associated Press gets to stay in Hamasistan so long as it prints Hamas propaganda and does not print stuff that it knows about how Hamas uses civilians as human shields. David Harsanyi has a good piece over at National Review about this. According to AP CEO Gary Pruitt, he said his organization had no indication Hamas was in the building or active in the building. He said, this is something we actively check to the best of our ability. We would never knowingly put our journalists at risks. This is nonsense, says Harsanyi. Pruitt knowingly puts journalists at risk every day he sends them to places like Gaza. But how did Pruitt actively check? Did he ask Hamas? Did he call the landlord? Did he ring the bells? It is, of course, highly probable that Hamas was using journalists as human shields, because this is what it does. During the last major outbreak of violence in 2014, Gaza's Shifa hospital became a de facto headquarters for Hamas leaders, who could be seen in the hallways and offices, according to the Washington Post. The AP did not report that. Why? Because they were working hand in glove with Hamas. In 2014, former AP reporter Maddie Friedman recounted, quote, the AP staff in Gaza City would witness a rocket launch right beside their office, endangering reporters and other civilians nearby, and AP would not report it. Not even in AP articles about Israeli claims that Hamas was launching rockets from residential areas. This happened. Hamas fighters would burst into the AP's Gaza bureau and threaten the staff, and AP would not report it. This also happened. Cameramen waiting outside Shifa Hospital in Gaza would film the arrival of civilian casualties and then, at a signal from an official, turn off their cameras when wounded and dead fighters came in, helping Hamas maintain the illusion that only civilians were dying. This too happened. The information comes from multiple sources with firsthand knowledge of these incidents. Now, what's incredible about this is that there are members of the Obama administration who fully acknowledge that this happened. Okay, there are members of the Obama administration who fully acknowledge this was probably being used as a Hamas headquarters. Okay, Tommy Vietor, who worked for Barack Obama, he didn't just drive his van, he was one of his advisors. He tweeted out, yeah, probably Hamas was in the building, but still you shouldn't hit the building. Unreal. Because at a certain point, it is not about being pro-Palestinian, because if you're pro-Palestinian, you should not be pro-Hamas. It is about just being anti the Jewish state. And you can sense why, okay, because there's a broader left-wing agenda out there. Unfortunately, it's what people have termed accurately the Red-Green Alliance, and basically green being Hamas, red being communists. There's this long-time feeling on the left that Israel is a colonial state, that Israel is an outpost of Western civilization, and so many of the people who are angry at Western civilization are angry at Israel. They're not angry at Israel, and therefore they're angry at America. They're angry at America, and therefore they're angry at Israel. Or they're angry at Europe, and therefore they're angry at Israel. So Europe, because Europe has always had issues with Jews, has attempted to separate off, except for a couple of countries right now, like Hungary and Austria. Okay, but the reality is that the left, all over the Western world, has decided that Israel is the bad guy. Why? Because Israel is part of this broader rubric of hierarchical values. The way the left views the world is that if you are successful in a civilized system, it is because you have victimized someone. This is the view in the United States. In the United States, from the left, the view is that if you are successful in the United States, it's because you have white privilege, or because the system was built to accommodate you, or because you have internalized your own whiteness. And the same thing happens internationally. If there is a group that is successful, and you can castigate them as white. Jews suddenly became white for this purpose. And you can castigate them as white versus the quote-unquote brown Palestinians, which is the way that Rashida Tlaib talks about this. Then that is just another indicator of hierarchical systems that have to be torn down, which is why you've heard Rashida Tlaib explicitly say this. She'll say Black Lives Matter is the same thing as the Palestinians. They are not the same thing. For a variety of reasons, they are not the same thing. And for one, Black Lives Matter as a movement, last I checked, was not supposed to be firing rockets into American cities. I was told the Black Lives Matter movement was distinct from the rioters and looters. If she wants to make a different claim, that's on Rashida Tlaib. But it is not a surprise to see Black Lives Matter supporting Hamas. They came out and tweeted yesterday, Black Lives Matter stands in solidarity with Palestinians. We are a movement committed to ending settler colonialism in all forms, and will continue to advocate for Palestinian liberation. Always have and always will be. Hashtag Free Palestine. By Free Palestine, they don't mean a separate state of Palestine living alongside in peace and harmony a Jewish state. They mean wiping out the state of Israel. This has been in the BLM manifesto for quite a while. Okay, Faith for Black Lives is a group that put out a letter to the Biden administration trying to urge Biden not to sell weapons to Israel to defend itself. Okay, and unfortunately, this has infused a huge percentage of the Democratic Party. This whole perspective has infused a large percentage of the Democratic Party. How's this for a title? Ben Shapiro Show subscriber destroys like button with clicks and logic. I'd watch that. Make it happen, gang.